The orbital carrier hung in the silence above the survival moon, its matte hull gleaming under the twin suns of the Zeltrax system. Inside, the cadets lined up at the drop bay in rigid silence, each armored in standardized field fatigues, each carrying the single object allowed for this zero-tech trial. Plasma knives, hardened alloy clubs, monofilament wires coiled on skeletal reels, all were permitted so long as they required no power. The purpose of the trial was simple: survive 2 weeks in complete technological isolation on one of the most unstable wilderness moons in the sector. It was a test of instinct, leadership, and survival. Every 2 years, the Galactic Combat Academy sent its best to the surface of Atari's 9, and every 2 years, it weeded out those who would never survive the realities of frontline command. The cadets were from every species imaginable: the massive, tusked Traxel, the crystalline Nivari who shimmered with refracted sunlight, the three-eyed Zavarians whose bone blades protruded from their arms like living weapons. Yet despite the visual chaos of alien biology, there was one figure who stood out for the opposite reason: her simplicity. Human. Small in stature compared to those around her. Dark hair tied back into a tight knot, calm eyes, and in her right hand, a stick, not a spear, not even sharpened, just a stick. Weathered and carved, yes, smoothed by time and effort, but unmistakably primitive. Sergeant Lila Morgan was the only human cadet in this year's trial. She had passed every prior exam with silent excellence, never drawing attention to herself, never needing praise. She moved with quiet discipline, her boots making no more sound than a whisper against the ship's steel floor. Her stick was slung across her back like a staff, tied with a frayed cord at the ends and wrapped in worn cloth near the grip. It looked like something a wandering monk might carry, not a warrior. As the inspection line moved, the cadets stepped forward to present their chosen items. One by one, the alien general overseeing the drop trial evaluated each weapon with a practiced eye. General Threx Ulzon was a 7-foot-tall Drektari, a species known for its rigid discipline and zero tolerance for incompetence. His armor bore a dozen service sigils, and his left arm had been replaced by a mechanical one after a battle with insurgent raiders on Dagon 5. His reputation was known across the academy: brutal, efficient, unflinching. He had no patience for weakness. He stopped before a Traxal cadet who presented a bone blade the size of a grown man's leg. The general nodded once. Acceptable. He moved on to the crystalline cadet, who bowed and presented a coiled blade made of spun glass that could slice through cloth by mere proximity. Efficient, he said. Then he reached Lila. She stood straight, chin raised, but said nothing. She simply untied the stick from her back and offered it forward with both hands. The silence stretched. Threx tilted his head slightly, as if unsure whether he was being mocked. "This is your tool?" he asked. His voice was rough, like metal grinding against rock. Lila nodded once. "A stick," he said, louder now. "A carved piece of wood?" He looked down the line and let out a sharp barking sound that passed for Drektari laughter. A few cadets chuckled nervously, but most simply looked on in quiet discomfort. The general stepped forward and took the stick from her hands, turning it slowly. No metal, no edge, no weight. He turned the staff over. "What do you intend to do with this? Build a campfire and hope the predators die laughing?" Lila didn't speak. She simply held his gaze. Threx waited for a reply. When none came, he exhaled loudly and threw the stick back to her. She caught it mid-air with one hand and slipped it over her shoulder without blinking. "Enjoy your funeral, human," he said. "Try not to cry when the shadows start whispering." She said nothing. The remaining cadets were inspected quickly. The drop order was randomized, but Lila ended up being one of the last. The others launched in pairs or trios, their pods streaking through the atmosphere like falling stars, trailing plasma behind them. When it was finally her turn, she stepped into the pod alone. The cockpit was stark. No controls. Just a countdown and a readout of vitals. The restraints locked around her shoulders and thighs. A soft hum filled the small space as the pod pressurized. "Deployment in 10 seconds, the mechanical voice announced. Lila gripped the stick across her lap and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. In her mind, she pictured the terrain, the reports she had memorized before the trial, jagged cliffs, thick jungles, unpredictable weather patterns, and territorial beasts with sensory adaptations beyond anything earthborn. No supplies would be dropped. No transmissions would be allowed. Only observation satellites would watch from orbit, recording their choices, their mistakes, their survival, or their deaths. 5 seconds. Her heartbeat was steady, her pulse unreadable. 3, 2, 1. The pod launched with a roar. She felt the sudden lurch as gravity took hold, and then the burning friction of re-entry. Through the tiny viewport, clouds ripped past in flashes, then the green-brown blur of terrain, a forest, mountains beyond, and a glint of water. Impact. The pod slammed into the soil, throwing dirt and moss high into the air. Steam hissed from the vents, the restraints released. Lila stepped out into a world alive with heat and humidity. The air smelled of iron and sap. Insects hummed unseen. The trees towered like skyscrapers, their bark glistening with strange fluids. In the far distance, something howled, low and guttural. She didn't flinch. With practiced ease, she checked the pod's hull for usable scrap, finding only a few metal shards and a broken panel. She took a strap from the seat and tucked it into her belt. Then she walked 20 paces to a clearing where sunlight filtered through, leaned her stick against a stone, and began clearing the brush with her hands. She moved with intention, quiet, focused. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She wasn't here to dominate. She was here to survive. Not just survive, but thrive. Back in orbit, General Threx Ulzon watched her feed. His expression was unreadable. Around him, other feeds flickered, cadets screaming, running, hiding, already disoriented. But Lila? She had just sat down on a rock and pulled a leaf into her lap, turning it over with curiosity. She wasn't looking for enemies. She was reading the world. Threx grunted. "A stick," he muttered. "Let's see how long that lasts." By the second morning, the jungle had claimed its first lives. The screams began long before dawn, muffled and distant, like echoes swallowed by the thick canopy. Birds scattered in sudden bursts, and somewhere a predator let out a guttural snarl, followed by silence. Lila crouched low under the thick roots of a split-trunked tree, her fingers coated in damp soil as she finished setting the final notch in her snare line. The traps weren't designed to kill, not yet. They were warnings, tripwire signals, early detection systems that used tension, bent saplings, and rocks wrapped in vines. She needed information more than she needed food. That would come later. A soft rustle to her left made her pause. She tilted her head slightly, not moving her body, and listened. It wasn't the crash of something large or the skitter of something small. It was controlled, slow, intelligent. Someone was watching. She reached back for her stick without looking. The grip felt familiar now, smooth where her palm had worn it down over the past day. She didn't lift it. Not yet. Another rustle, this time behind her. A second presence. Her lips barely moved as she whispered the breath out of her lungs and stepped forward off the trap line, giving it a clear field. Seconds passed. Then the first one pounced. The creature lunged from the foliage with a snarl, a four-limbed beast the size of a wolf, but bulkier, its hide glistening with oily scales and ridges of bone. Its eyes were pitch black, and rows of thin spines quivered along its back like antennae. It didn't hesitate. It went straight for her throat. She ducked left. The beast flew past her and slammed into the snare line. The hidden vine snapped taut and whipped a bundle of rocks into the creature's ribs with a heavy crunch. It howled and twisted, teeth gnashing, but its momentum had slowed. She moved. One step, then another. She pivoted on her back foot and brought the stick down hard, not on the head, not on the body, but on the exposed joint behind the front leg. The beast screamed. She spun again, ducked a flailing claw, and jabbed the stick directly into its open mouth as it turned. Not to hurt, to wedge. The creature bit down instinctively, and the stick held. Jaw locked open, gag reflex triggered. Panic. She grabbed the strap from her belt and looped it behind the creature's head, pulling tight. The beast bucked, snarled, tried to twist, but it was choking on wood and fury. 30 seconds later, it collapsed. She stepped back, breathing through her nose, sweat clinging to her forehead. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the physical exertion. She looked down at the beast, then at the bite marks on her stick. The wood held. That was the first. She didn't kill it. She didn't need to. She waited until it lost consciousness, then used the remaining cord to tie its hind legs. When it woke, it would limp away. It would remember her scent. It wouldn't return. But others would. By midday, the heat had become a living thing. It pressed against her skin with wet fingers, clinging, suffocating. The air tasted metallic, as if laced with copper and ozone. Her water source was now a moss-lined depression near a tree root that she had carefully filtered through layers of cloth and crushed leaves. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. She sipped slowly, always counting her swallows. She had no tools to boil, no chemicals to purify. What she had was instinct and timing. The moss near the water was still vivid green. No insect carcasses floated in the shallows. That was enough. Across the jungle, she heard more shouts, arguments, running, what sounded like a fight. She ignored them. She wasn't here to chase echoes. She was here to build. Near a patch of tall reeds, she found the perfect clay. Orange in color, thick and sticky, smelling of warm rot. She tested it with her fingertips, rolled it, packed it, left it in the sun. It dried in layers. Not ideal for walls, but perfect for sealing cracks. She began sketching a mental map of her perimeter. 5 snare lines now. 2 warning bells. Hollow pods strung with pebbles. 1 elevated lookout. Just a long branch wedged between the crooks of a tree that allowed her to see the clearing from above. She slept in short intervals, never more than 20 minutes at a time. Each time she woke, she checked the traps. Reset, rewired, reinforced. It was on the 3rd night that she saw him. The alien cadet stumbled into her clearing without grace or caution. He was Zavarian, tall, thin, with 3 reflective eyes and deep slashes along his ribs. His left arm hung useless at his side. His blade was gone. His clothes were torn and soaked in blood. He looked at her with a mixture of hope and desperation. Then he collapsed. She didn't speak. She moved to his side and checked his pulse. Still alive. The wounds were clean, but bleeding. She gathered moss, pressed it into the gashes, and used a cord from her belt to wrap his torso tight. She poured 2 swallows of water into his mouth. He coughed once, then slept. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. By dawn, he was sitting up. "You're human," he said, voice hoarse. She nodded. "You were the one with the stick." She didn't reply. He looked around the small camp, the crude water trap, the cooking pit she had started with charcoal and a concave stone, the vines braided into rope, the sharpened rocks placed at weak entry points. "You built all this?" he asked. Still no reply. After a long silence, he said, "We were 6. 2 Drektari, 1 Navari, a Traxal, a hybrid, and me. We landed too close to the ravine. Something attacked the first night. We held out. For a while, he touched his chest. The Traxal panicked, started swinging, killed one of the Drektari. The others ran. I don't know if anyone made it." Lila stood, checked a nearby trap, and reset the tension line. He watched her for a moment, then said, "Why help me?" She looked at him for the first time. "You're still breathing," she said, "and you didn't try to take anything." He blinked, then nodded slowly. She handed him a sharpened stick. "Dig a trench," she said. "South side. We'll need drainage before the rains." He took the stick. And so the second day ended. The trench on the southern edge was nearly half a meter deep by morning. Lila had widened it at a slant, packing the outer side with damp clay and leaves to channel runoff away from the sleeping area. The Zavarian cadet, who had introduced himself simply as Kale, worked beside her without protest. His wounds had scabbed over. He moved stiffly, but his eyes were sharper now. He followed her movements, mimicked her notching patterns, and began tying his own loops when setting new traps. He didn't talk much, which she appreciated. He didn't ask for orders either. He watched. Then he acted. The first wall wasn't really a wall, not at first. It was a pattern in her mind, an arrangement of weight, tension, and terrain. She paced the boundary slowly, carving marks into trees and dropping pebbles where sight lines were clearest. The slope behind her camp gave a natural defense on the north. The jungle opened slightly to the south, and that worried her. Too much visibility. Too many paths for something to charge through in the dark. She needed to create a bottleneck, a place where nothing could enter without exposing itself first. She chose 6 saplings and cut them just above the root, using her stick as a lever and wedge. With a sharpened rock, she carved their ends into angled points, then hammered them into the soil using a stone the size of her fist. She tied the tops with coiled vines, overlapping them to create a crude fence, not enough to stop something big, but enough to slow it, to make it hesitate, to give her time. Kale watched her build the first segment. By midday, he had begun assembling a second, copying her angles but adding his own reinforcement with crossbars made of fallen limbs. She nodded once when he finished. That was all he needed. The wall grew, slowly, irregularly, but deliberately. She refused to waste effort on perfection. Function first. Symmetry could come later. She used her stick to dig a small pit near the base of the fence and lined it with sharp bones from the beast she had fought earlier. It had left behind a carcass after limping off and collapsing near the water line. She harvested what she could, not for food, not yet, but for tools. The bones were curved and jagged, perfect for spikes and hooks. She coated them in sap from a red-veined plant that smelled acrid and made her eyes burn. That alone was enough to suggest it was toxic. She handled it with wrapped hands. By the 5th day, the camp had structure. The fire pit had been moved to the center. Smoke no longer escaped freely, but was filtered through woven branches overhead, camouflaging it. 2 lean-tos had been constructed, one from bark and moss, the other from overlapping leaves that curved like scales. The trench system now wrapped around 3 sides, guiding rainwater into a collection pool that fed into a filtering bed made of gravel and crushed shells. The 4th side, the northern slope, remained open, but she had plans for that. Kale had begun calling the camp the Shell. He muttered it once while reinforcing a corner post. She didn't correct him. It wasn't a name she would have chosen, but it made sense. It was protective, layered, deceptive in appearance. It looked fragile, but it held. On the 6th morning, the silence broke again. A scream, shrill, sharp, female. Lila turned her head just slightly. Kale was already on his feet. Another scream, closer. Then crashing through the underbrush, a figure appeared, stumbling, panting, bleeding from one shoulder, a Nevari cadet. Her crystalline skin was dulled with dirt and cracked at the joints. She wore no weapon. She looked back over her shoulder and nearly tripped. Behind her, the forest exploded with movement. A massive shape barreled forward, low to the ground, covered in segmented plates. A jaw opened wide, revealing rings of fangs. Lila recognized the species, a tunnel lurker, blind but fast, using vibration to track prey. Lila moved. She sprinted for the spike pit near the southern fence and grabbed a hanging vine. Kale followed without question. The Nevari cadet reached the first snare line and tripped it. A bundle of thorns whipped across the tunnel lurker's side. It hissed and swerved, disoriented. "Here!" Lila shouted, the first word she had spoken in hours. The Nivari cadet turned toward her voice. Lila grabbed the cadet's uninjured arm and pulled her behind the wall. Kyle took the opposite corner and raised a sharpened post. The tunnel lurker reached the pit, then fell. Its front legs sank into the sharpened bone. It screamed, a sound like rock grinding on glass, and thrashed. The wall held, not perfectly, but enough. Lila slammed her stick into the side of the creature's mouth as it reared. She jammed it upward, twisting. Kale struck from the side. The creature fell again, disoriented. Then it ran, not away but down, digging itself into the soil with terrifying speed until only a trembling hole remained. Silence returned. The Nivari cadet fell to her knees. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't cry. Lila handed her water. Kyle retrieved a moss pack and began cleaning her wound. The girl whispered, "Thank you." Lila nodded. "You saw the creature first?" "Yes," the girl replied. It came through our shelter. The others, I don't know, what direction?" "East." Lila considered that. 3 cadets in 1 shelter, 1 survivor, 2 unaccounted for. She stepped back and looked at the pit. 2 spikes were broken. The wall was cracked where the creature had slammed against it. She would need to reinforce it before nightfall. She looked at the girl again. "What's your name?" "Syra," the cadet said. "Can you walk?" Syra stood, nodded. Lila pointed to the lean-to covered in bark. "Rest there. When you can, you help." Syra smiled faintly. "Understood." That night, Kale reinforced the wall with new bones. Syra patched the holes with bark and sap. Lila climbed the tree at the edge of the clearing and sat in the branches, watching the stars. Her camp now had 3 cadets, 3 different species, 3 different backgrounds. No ranks, no orders, only work and survival, and walls rising, one by one. By the 9th day, the camp no longer resembled a clearing. It had become something else, something deliberate, something crafted. The walls, once patchwork fences of vine and branch, had grown thicker and taller. Lila had ordered vertical reinforcements made from stripped tree trunks, wedged deep into the earth and lashed with triple-wrapped cords of bark fiber. Kyle had learned how to harden sap by boiling it down over coals, creating a resin that sealed weak points. Syra had repurposed broken shards of her crystalline plating into crude blades, embedding them along the upper ridges of the wall in jagged rows. The perimeter was now a barrier, not impenetrable, but formidable. Inside, everything had function. The fire pit had been split into 2 sections, one for cooking, one for heating clay. A series of shallow trenches connected the drainage pool to a second reservoir for washing. Platforms had been raised along the interior wall using bent branches and packed soil, offering elevated lookouts with basic shelter from the rain. The lean-tos had been replaced by a circular sleeping structure with woven walls and a roof lined with waxy leaves that repelled water. The place breathed like a living organism, expanding and adapting with each new day. Word had begun to spread. No one said it aloud, but it was clear. The jungle whispered. The cadets who had survived longer than the others were moving, shifting from blind wandering to deliberate paths. One by one, bruised, bloodied, burned, and hungry, they began appearing at the edge of the camp's boundaries. Lila never turned anyone away. By the end of the 10th day, 8 cadets had taken refuge within the walls, 4 alien species, 2 humans, and 2 hybrids. Some brought information, others brought stories. One brought nothing but the shirt on his back and the look of someone who had run for too long. She accepted them all under one condition: work. No exceptions, no observers. Anyone who ate had to contribute. That meant digging, weaving, setting traps, repairing walls, or tending fire rotations. She assigned no titles. She asked no questions about what had happened outside. She simply walked the perimeter each morning, reviewed the damages, then handed out the day's tasks. If someone was too weak to stand, she gave that person weaving work or drying roots. No one complained. No one refused. On the 11th morning, rain fell, not in droplets, but in sheets. The sky cracked open and poured with relentless force. Rivers formed where none had existed. The earth turned to mud. The winds carried scents of rotting vegetation and sulfur. Lila stood in the center of the camp, soaked to the bone, watching as her trench system held firm, guiding the runoff into the reservoirs. The walls creaked, but didn't collapse. The structure swayed, but didn't split. She turned to Syra. "Roof," she said. Syra nodded and rushed to the main shelter, shouting for the others to secure the upper branches. Kale passed by with 3 cadets in tow, hauling a thick branch between them for reinforcement. One of them, a hybrid with gilled neck folds and clawed feet, slipped in the mud, nearly losing his grip. Kyle caught him, barked an order, and they moved on. By sunset, the rain eased into a cold mist. Fires crackled back to life. The cadets sat close to the flames, eating boiled root and dried meat. Lila took the first watch, pacing the wall with her stick in one hand and a sack of pebbles in the other. Each time she spotted a new gap in the wall's surface, she dropped a stone there as a marker for repair. From the far side of the clearing, footsteps approached, hesitant but not panicked. She didn't look until the figure stepped into firelight. It was a Drektari, tall, broad, armor-boned across his shoulders, his right arm bandaged in fronds and plant sinew. He bore no weapon. His jaw was clenched tight, and his eyes flicked to her stick with something that resembled recognition or shame. She said nothing. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture that for his species bordered on reverence. "Permission to enter," he said. She nodded once. Kale appeared beside her. "That makes 12, he said. Lila answered, "Too many to sleep in one structure." He crossed his arms. "I'll start building another." As the Drektari was brought inside and tended to, Lila walked the perimeter again. The moon was visible now, casting pale silver over the forest. Somewhere in the distance, a predator howled. But it didn't come closer. It had learned. Later that night, Syra found her by the clay pit. "You don't talk much," Syra said. Lila glanced at her but said nothing. Syra continued, "But you built this from nothing. Everyone sees it." Lila responded, "It's not finished." Syra tilted her head. "Does it need to be?" Lila didn't answer. She looked at the firelight flickering against the wall's curved edges. Syra hesitated, then said, "When I first arrived, I thought I was the last. I had never felt so alone. Now, this feels like a village," Lila replied. "It's not." Syra smiled faintly. "Not yet." She walked away. Lila stood alone for several minutes, her fingers curled loosely around the stick that had become both tool and symbol. Then she walked to the center of the camp, knelt beside the fire, and began drawing in the dirt with the tip of the staff, arcs, loops, lines, and notations. She wasn't sketching a shelter anymore. She was designing a stronghold. By the 13th day, the fortress was unmistakable even from the upper canopy. No longer a scattered collection of shelters, it had become an enclosed compound of layered defenses, reinforced watchpoints, and active patrols. From the treetops, it looked like a spiked crown embedded in the earth, a shape that didn't belong in the wild, yet had grown from it. The jungle bent around it now. Beasts skirted its edges. Predators no longer tested the perimeter. The air near the entrance smelled of ash and sap, a warning born of burned vines and hardened clay. Lila stood atop the highest platform, watching the mist roll in from the north. Her eyes scanned the movement of shadows in the tree line, but nothing approached. Her stick rested across her shoulders, both hands draped over it, loose and balanced. Her dark hair was damp with sweat, strands stuck to her face. Her clothes were stiff with mud and smoke. Below, cadets moved with practiced rhythm, weaving, sharpening, repairing, cooking. It no longer resembled a training scenario. It looked like a frontier village in a war zone. Kyle approached from below, climbing the ladder with ease despite his lean frame. His eyes were focused, voice low. "There's movement in the canopy." She turned her head slightly. "Beast?" He shook his head. "Drone. Metal glint. Same arc pass every 40 seconds. Patterned like observation." She looked upward through the narrow slits of sun-cut mist. "They're watching now," she said. Kale leaned on the edge beside her. "So what will they see?" She didn't answer. She turned and walked down the platform. She didn't need to rehearse. Everything was already in place. By midday, the sound arrived. Not an animal call, not wind, but a deep, humming thrum that shook the branches like the growl of a starship's engine throttled low. All heads turned toward the western ridge. A single black pod descended slowly, controlled, deliberate. It hovered above the clearing for a moment, then released a burst of steam before landing with a hard crunch of crushed foliage. Lila stepped forward alone. The hatch hissed open. General Threx Ulzon emerged, taller than most present, his Drektari armor glinting beneath a thin environmental field. He carried no weapon, but his stance radiated authority. His face was expressionless. Behind him, a small squad of recorders hovered. Silent drones mapping every inch of the fortress, recording every face, every detail. He didn't speak immediately. He walked forward, boots crushing mud and twigs, until he stood in the center of the camp. His eyes swept from the elevated towers to the sharpened walls, the fire pits, the drainage systems, the weapon racks. He studied the sleeping shelters, the multi-species coordination, the silent efficiency with which everything functioned. Then his gaze landed on her. She stood still, arms at her sides, the stick gripped loosely in one hand. He stared at it for several seconds before finally speaking. "You did this." She didn't nod. She didn't answer. She waited. He looked past her at Kyle, then at Syra, who was standing near the filtration basin. He scanned the faces of the others, Drektari, Nivari, human, hybrid, all watching in silence. No command structure, no issued gear, no support drops. His voice was even, but the words rang out clear. "No authorization to construct permanent defenses." Lila lifted her chin slightly. "Was there a rule against survival?" He blinked once. Kale stepped forward, but she held up a hand and stopped him without looking. Threx circled slowly. "You turned a trial into a settlement. You took 13 days and changed the jungle's behavior. We've run this exercise 20 times across 15 systems. No one's ever done this," she said. "Then the rules are flawed." Threx turned and stepped closer to her. "You were given a stick." She raised it slightly, rotating it in her hand, then lowered it again. It was enough. Silence hung in the humid air. Then he gestured toward the wall. "You reinforced structural supports with fibered bone and sealed them with compound resin made from local plants. Who taught you that?" She responded, "No one. I watched what broke, then made sure it didn't." He looked toward a tower. "And the design?" She said, "I carved it in the dirt before it stood." He studied her for a moment longer. Then, in a voice quieter but no less firm, he said, "This wasn't the point of the trial." She met his gaze. "Then perhaps the trial missed the point." A long pause followed. The drones above emitted a soft chime and began to retract, the data collection evidently complete. Threx let out a breath, low and sharp. He turned his back to her and looked once more across the camp. Then he spoke, louder now. "This trial was designed to test survival under zero-tech isolation, to evaluate stress, hierarchy, and adaptive leadership, not to forge civilization." He turned back to her. "And yet you built one." She replied, "Only because it was needed." He stared at her. Then, finally, he said, "Report to orbit tomorrow at first light. Bring the others." Extraction will begin at dawn. She asked, "What happens after?" Threx paused, then said, "That decision no longer belongs to me." He walked back toward the pod. The hatch hissed open. He stepped inside and vanished behind the rising shield. As the engines roared to life and the black vessel lifted through the mist, the cadets gathered silently around her. No one spoke. No one asked what had been said. They didn't need to. They could see it on her face, a calm resolve, neither triumph nor doubt, just forward motion. She turned to Kale. "Dismantle the traps. Leave the bones, then to Syra. Break down the towers. Take what can be carried." She raised her voice slightly. "We leave it cleaner than we found it. Nothing wasted. Nothing forgotten." The cadets moved. Some limped. Some leaned on others. But they moved. As night fell on the last day of the trial, the fires burned lower than usual. The fortress was silent, not in fear or exhaustion, but in reflection. The jungle watched, and for the first time in centuries, it offered no threats. Lila sat at the center once more, drawing circles in the dirt with the end of her stick. Not plans, not maps, just circles. By dawn, they were gone. The fortress remained, quiet, hollow, half dismantled. The vines would reclaim it, the rain would wash it, but the shape would remain, deep in the soil, a memory pressed into the planet's skin. Far above, aboard the command vessel orbiting the moon, General Threx Ulzon stood before a hollow screen showing her camp's final form. He tapped a button, pulled up a new file, and entered 2 words in the margin beside her name. "Not standard." Then he saved the record and closed the screen.